Hey there, I'm Sarah Porridge, and you are tuning in to the Hear Us Roar podcast. Join me for inspired conversations with Asian women, chatting about how ideas and passions can ignite truly transformative journeys. On today's episode, you'll learn how Michelle Lee went from being a journalism major who did quite a bit of job hopping in her early years to becoming the powerhouse editor-in-chief of Allure magazine, leading this iconic publication into its 30th year. And with great power comes great responsibility. Since stepping into her current role, Michelle took it upon herself to transform cultural norms by recognizing Allure's power to change the world. From eliminating the term anti-aging from the magazine's vocabulary to featuring Halima Aden on the cover rocking a hijab, Michelle is taking some very intentional leaps to diversify the definition of beauty.
We have to kind of show each other that things are possible. And so by us making our covers really diverse and just doing things that were at that point considered outside the box, I think that we did push forward this movement of showing these things are possible.
The more we can see ourselves reflected on the covers of magazines and in editorial content, the more Asian Americans can start to broaden our own perceived spectrum of possibilities. And the more diverse storylines of success become sticky and become the norm. I appreciate Michelle so much for everything that she's done. And so without further ado, let's get right into her story.
I was actually born upstate in Warwick, New York. And so my parents lived in New Jersey at the time. So I actually never lived in New York City as a kid. But I was mostly raised in Connecticut, actually. So up until the age of 16, we lived in Connecticut. My dad had a job in Greenwich. And my dad, when I was 16, lost his job and he got a new job in Florida. So we ended up moving down to South Florida. And it was major culture shock. So when I was growing up in Connecticut, we were only one of two Asian families in town. The only other Asian family in town was my best friend, and they were Indian. And so super, super white town. And I faced a lot of racism there. I've actually talked about this pretty extensively on Instagram before, that when I was in 7th grade, I had these bullies who called me an ugly chink literally every day, completely harassed me. And it was such a formative time in my life because I was sort of silent about it for a long time. I never said a word of it to my family because I was so embarrassed of it myself. Mm-hmm. And so I had brought it up to a vice principal at the school, and they held this assembly. And I remember sitting in an assembly with like a bunch of kids, and like the two bullies were like in the front row. They literally, in this assembly with the vice principal, said something so rude. They were like, oh, who was complaining? Was it Wang Chung? And like, it was so rude and like out there for everyone to hear. Vice principal didn't say a thing. The whole thing got brushed under the rug. So then I did actually end up telling my parents something because the boys started harassing my mom. So it happened at the bus stop, and they sort of like were blocking my mom's car from going. So my mom got involved then and had one of the boys' parents come over. And I remember like watching them at the front door talking about things. And the parents stood there and the dad was like, that doesn't sound like something my son would do. No, this doesn't sound right. And they totally brushed it off. Again, like in this formative year of like, you're in 7th grade, you're like a teenager and learning what everything means in the world. And for your voice to literally mean nothing, like you're speaking up and saying, these kids are harassing me. I don't think I even knew what the term racist meant back then, because like we didn't even talk about stuff like that, but I knew it was wrong, obviously. But it had this lasting impact on me. Also around that same time, my French teacher was talking about what Chinese people sound like in class. And he was sort of doing this like, ching chong, ching chong, ching chong. And I sat in class and I literally slunk down in my chair because what
was even the context of that?
I think he was saying, like, talking about what different accents sound like. So he was talking about, in French, we sound like this. An Italian accent sounds like this. And then he gets to, and then Chinese people sound like this. Ching chong, ching chong. And I was mortified. And so obviously now as an adult, you think things are so much different now that if I were a kid then I might say something to the teacher, I might say something after class or like, to one of the administrators or at least my parents. I was not equipped with the knowledge of what to do, how to deal with it. So what I did was I wanted to just disappear. Like I literally just like went down in my chair and thought, I hope nobody is looking at me right now. This is so embarrassing. But these are the moments that I really remember in my life, right? Where you think about one, I guess, how things could have gone differently. Like now I'm like, oh, I wish I did this differently, whatever. But for many years, I feel like it taught me, unfortunately, that my voice didn't matter and that I should be embarrassed of these things and that the greatest thing that I should have to do is try and blend in with people. So it wasn't really until I was an adult, like truly an adult, that I started to see things differently. Like I mentioned, when I was 16, I moved down to Florida and it was so much more diverse down there. So I saw this whole other side of the world. And then after college, I moved up to New York City. And of course, then you see like this whole other world where there's so much diversity and other things. But still at that point, I think I was trying so hard just to blend in. And that was my MO for a really long time, up until, I want to say, maybe like the past 5 years. Like in the past 5 years, I think I've really come into my own and realized that my Asianness is such a huge asset. I really looked at it the opposite before, that I again just wanted to blend in. And now I'm like, being different and being unique and being Asian is such a wonderful thing.
I mean, it reminds me of what our common friend Soon Mi said to me during our podcast episode, which is that our differences are our superpower. Until we realize that, until we embrace that, it's easy to want to fade and disappear when these things happen to us. I was actually rewatching PBS's Asian American, that documentary. And, you know, one thing that this woman said really stuck with me, which is that, you know, hate crimes are not a reflection of who the crime is happening to, but who the perpetrator is perceiving them to be. How did you become who you are in these past 5 years in terms of just feeling more comfortable in your own skin?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I've thought about that a lot. I think part of it is just having the confidence to be who you are. And so part of that comes with, when I was early in my career, I was definitely not confident in who I was. And I definitely wasn't confident in even giving my best ideas sometimes. I think that as a young editor, I always remember this feeling of feeling so nervous walking into ideas meetings. And, you know, all throughout school and stuff, I was definitely not one of those kids who was like sitting front row and raising my hand all the time. Like I definitely was trying to like hang back. And I think I held on to some of those old anxieties that I felt like if I stand out too much, everyone's going to be staring at me. And so I think that over time and with success, I think it is sort of a natural thing that you do develop that sense of self-confidence in yourself.
I can relate so deeply with Michelle's struggles with self-confidence in her formative years. As someone who also experienced bullying, the way I dealt with it was through assimilation, which in some ways meant chasing unachievable standards of American beauty. This led me to years of disordered eating and caused deep scars that I still battle from time to time. The pain associated with these persistent scars is precisely what makes Michelle's work in redefining beauty so powerful and so pertinent. I asked Michelle what her concept of beauty was growing up and if that changed at all at some point in her life.
I grew up mostly in the 80s. I also sometimes consider myself to be a child of the 90s because I feel like those were such formative years in terms of style and stuff that it's like when I think about the style that I love, I'm like, I still love like that grunge look and everything. I never saw myself in beauty though. For me, like the stars who I grew up with, Hollywood and magazines and movies and TV, it was all so white still back in the 80s and 90s. The only Asian stars who I ever really saw were Bruce Lee, obviously, Martin Yan from Yan Can Cook.
Oh my goodness, I remember him.
Yeah, I'm a bit older than you, I think, so I don't know if you remember the Pearl Cream lady. There was like an infomercial and it was called Pearl Cream. And so the woman who was like she was a spokesperson for it was always like holding this jar of Pearl Cream, like Pearl Cream. But that's how few Asians I saw ever.
Right.
You know, that I remember this woman who was like Pearl Cream. I also do recall Connie Chung. And so that was like a big thing for me, seeing Connie Chung on TV. And I actually met her at an event at Apex for Youth a couple of years ago. And she hugged me and said, "I'm so proud of you." And I wanted to cry. But yeah, I never saw myself represented in advertising, media, Hollywood, anything.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when I would read magazines too. Like I did like reading magazines for, fashion and beauty. And there would be advice about how to put on makeup, for example. And it would say, put this color eyeshadow in your crease. And I always remember thinking, well, I don't have a crease. And
right.
You don't question it sometimes as a kid. You just think, oh, well, I must be at fault because I don't have a crease. So my image of beauty as I was growing up was, honestly, it was very white. It was very much the 90s supermodels. It was Kate Moss. It was Claudia Schiffer, Cindy Crawford. It wasn't until I got older, like much, much older, that I think I saw many more Asians. And honestly, the first wave of it was probably influencers. There are so many successful Asian American influencers out there. You've got Chriselle Lim, Ami Song. Like, I feel like they definitely helped to lead some of that.
For sure. And you know what it's reminding me of? The really, really tough thing, especially for Chinese Americans growing up too, in terms of their own perception of beauty, is that in China, white features are also seen as more beautiful.
Yeah.
And is showcased in advertising and publications as being, I would venture to say, more beautiful than Asian features. How does someone growing up in the United States, especially with a Chinese background, feel beautiful when literally everywhere you see, beauty is being conveyed in a completely different way than how you look?
Oh, absolutely. I felt like an alien growing up. I think because the only other Asians who I ever saw, again, it was like my family. And I love my family, but I definitely felt like I was the only one growing up who looked the way that I did. And I will tell you, I haven't really talked about this that much, but I remember a time when I was younger where I put Scotch tape on my eyes because I thought it would be sort of like braces. Like, I had braces. So when you wear braces, if you wear braces long enough, your teeth move and they become that shape. I thought that if I wore Scotch tape on my eyes, they would get rounder. So I sort of like taped the edges in so they would become rounder over time. And I think about that now and how totally warped that is. That as a kid, I would even think to do something like that. It's really warped. But yeah, like over time, like I think now that I'm at Allure, I did a lot of like really deep thinking because Allure as a brand is like this amazing, like super well-respected brand, and it's mainstream. So I also knew that anything that we did, it's different. Like my job previously, I was the editor-in-chief of Nylon, which is a great brand, but much smaller. And so I knew that anything that I would do at Allure, it was going to get a lot of attention, right? And so I thought a lot about how do you reinvent and refresh a brand like Allure when it's, again, so trusted and so huge within the industry. And I thought it's not just about products. It's not just about trends. It is about like redefining what is beautiful. And we have this huge opportunity right now, like as the beauty authority, as the expert, that we can have this huge impact. We did like this little fireside chat, like Q&A with the sales team at some point when I first started. And so one of the sales leads was asking me like rapid fire questions. And she said, like they were trying to understand what I wanted to do with the brand a little bit better. And she had asked me this question about, what's your goal? Like, what do you want to do here? And I said, I want Allure to change the world. And it wasn't something that I had thought of beforehand, had not pre-planned that answer at all. And when I sat back after that fireside chat, and I thought about what that meant, I was like, wait, we actually can. And in some sense, it seems sort of like, okay, Allure, like you're a beauty brand, you're going to change the world. But I really think that when we think about what we look like, right, it is so entwined with race, ethnicity, gender, body shape, so many different things that we talk about on a daily basis in like politics and other like social issues. And we have that opportunity to kind of like go into that space and to change people's perceptions of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like you're in a position of power to be able to see that and make that happen. And I know that there's a lot of people that also want to do the same. They want to be in a position of power to be able to change these conversations. And what I love to know, Michelle, is actually how you got to where you are. I know you were a graduate of the University of South Florida, that you got a bachelor's degree in journalism. Walk me through your career. How did you get to where you are to be able to make the impact that you're making now?
Oh, it has been a wild ride. I always say that in the beginning of my career, probably the first 7 to 10 years, I was a major job hopper. And I always say to young people who I'm talking to, do as I say, don't do as I do. Being a job hopper did mean that I went up the ladder rather quickly, but it also meant that people started to look at me as a job hopper. And so as someone who hires people now, I look at anyone who stayed in a job for like a year and then moved on as, like, do we really want to train this person if they're just going to be moving on? Are they just using this as a stepping stone? That being said, in the earlier part of my career, if anyone would have said to me, Michelle, one day you're going to be the editor-in-chief of Allure, I would have laughed so hard because I never thought it was possible. So I always feel like I stumbled into a position of leadership in that I was a very hard worker. And so again, in the first 10 years of my career, I think that my whole MO was work really hard. And it's a very Asian American thing to do, right? Where you're like,
right, exactly.
Put your head down, work really hard, and someone's going to notice you. And to some extent, it works sometimes, right? Because people do say, wow, Michelle's really working hard. But that only gets you so far. And so in the second half of my career, I think I started to realize you do have to do a bit of self-promotion. And sometimes that sounds icky. And I don't know why that sounds icky, but maybe it is like part of like the Asian culture thing that, you know, you just should just work hard and be humble. And when I say self-promotion, I don't mean it as a, hey, look at me kind of way. But a lot of times when I look at people who I work with, let's say, the quiet warriors, they're great, but it's also sometimes you can work and work and work and work so hard, and the people who are managing you or above them don't necessarily notice it. So I think I learned over time, you have to be better at promoting yourself and just at least letting people understand what it is that you're working on. Like there is a great balance of doing that. But yeah, early in my career, I was very much a generalist. I've written about everything from parenting to cars, technology, finance, health and fitness. I really did a bit of everything, but I also did kind of always circle the world of fashion and beauty as well. This is the first role that I've had, though, that's been strictly beauty, and I love it because it's not just that I get to play with amazing products, but it is that I can fully explore the intersection between culture and beauty, which I think is really exciting. When I was younger, never thought that I would be an editor-in-chief, but I think that as time went on, as I was mentioning before, like that confidence started to build. And at some point, probably about 10 years ago, I remember feeling kind of like I did have superpowers. Like I felt like I was just in a groove that when I was in meetings and I had ideas, I just had things flowing out of me. And part of that is just that feeling of confidence and knowing that you can do things. And I remember thinking there was like one day where I was like, I think I could be a CEO one day, you know, and it's such a great feeling to be able to have worked really hard, but to understand that what you do, that you're really good at it. And I think maybe that was the thing too, that like earlier in my life, I never gave myself permission to say, you're really good at that. And so now I do understand that I'm good at that.
Giving credit where credit's due, I have to say that Michelle, you're not just good, you're amazing at what you do. I hear where she's coming from though about that icky feeling that comes along with self-promotion. There's a real level of cultural reticence within the Asian American community that, frankly, can do us a great disservice when it comes to spotlighting our own achievements as a means of rising up the ranks. I wanted to know if Michelle had any good advice for those of us who have struggled with this in our careers.
Yeah, it's hard because part of it is a personality thing. Like I know that I have shyness in my personality. I'm an introvert. So I think I told myself for a long time oh, you're just shy. And people used to say that to me when I was a little kid. Like, if I was kind of hanging on my mom, they'd be like, oh, she's shy. And so eventually you start to take those things to heart. And so for a long time, I just thought, well, I just must be shy. For example, I was terrible at public speaking, and it's still a skill that I'm working on, and I think I will continue to work on for the rest of my life. But part of it is just practice, and part of it is you just have to go out and do it. And so now I watch other people. Like, I'm very much a people watcher. So if there's someone who I see who's a great presenter, whether or not there's someone who's maybe a junior member of staff, but I feel like I can learn from them, I am watching them, and I'm watching their body language. I'm watching the things that they're talking about, how they're presenting. And so I'm very big on watch other people. So whether or not it is, identifying a mentor for yourself can be really helpful, or just watching a whole bunch of people who you admire, whether it's in real life. I mean, everything's virtual right now, but either that, or even sometimes listening to TED Talks, right? Like, there's so much information available to us right now online about having that confidence and being able to speak up. And also there is something about organizing thoughts in a concise way. And a lot of us, myself included, can ramble, right? And so I sometimes have to catch myself if I feel like I'm rambling, because one of the hallmarks, I think, of being a great presenter is being able to get your thoughts out in a concise way. So it's not necessarily even just having the confidence to say something, but making sure that if you are nervous especially, take a beat, gather your thoughts, and make sure that whatever you say is going to be something that's really thoughtful and exciting, and that it makes sense.
You've done a lot of amazing things within the publishing industry to shift the conversation towards more inclusive beauty, and it's still a huge challenge throughout the publishing world. Is there anything that we can do as consumers to support the magazines and the publications and the websites within this ecosystem that is perpetuating a more inclusive definition of beauty? What can we do as consumers to help positively reinforce that and keep the momentum going?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you asked that. I think one is engaging with the brands that you share their values. And I think there is this movement definitely towards that, right? Where brands, whether they're in publishing or they're consumer brands or other brands, everyone now is starting to really say, this is what we stand for. I think the consumer is very savvy, though, because we've seen, especially in this past year, there are a lot of brands that are kind of saying they believe in things, but you're like, I don't know. Like, your actions don't necessarily match that. So I tend to think that people can see through that. So when there are brands that you really feel like are doing great things, and what they say, they really are like walking the walk and talking the talk, really engage with them. It's great to share on social media, but it's also something different when you put your money where your mouth is too. So that's what I always encourage people to do as well. And, I don't mean this totally in like a self-serving way, because I mean this beyond just Allure. But if, let's say, everyone's wild about a cover, go out and buy the issue or subscribe to a magazine that you really appreciate what it is that they're doing. Because what happens a lot of times is this, I see this sometimes with like TV shows, right? Where everyone's like sharing on social media, like, oh, I love this show, blah, 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 whatever. But then they're not watching it or something like, and then the TV show ends up going away. And everyone's like, but wait, I thought that this was getting a lot of positive attention. So, if you care about things and you really truly believe that what they're doing shares your values and you just really appreciate it, make sure that you're supporting them in a lot of different ways so that those businesses and those brands really continue to grow.
Yeah, we vote with our dollar.
Yep.
I do want to take a moment to talk about the recent surge of anti-Asian hate crimes that are happening here in the United States. I know you're very vocal about it on social media and very involved in bringing attention to what's currently happening and providing solutions, right? What do you see as the root cause of why it's continuing to persist even months after the introduction of the term Kung Flu into our cultural lexicon? And what do you propose as a path towards peace and understanding?
Yeah, it is so sad to me what's been happening because, like I said, I, suffered a lot of racism when I was younger. And I remember thinking, maybe 10 years ago, well, thank God the world has changed a lot and that my kids might not have to go through that. And here we are, right? And I remember when, not to get too political, but I remember when there were all the chants of build the wall or anti-Muslim sentiment in this country. And, some older Asian relatives, let's say, and other people who we knew were voting for Trump. And I remember saying to some of them, this racism could come back to Asians in a heartbeat. And here we are, right? And so I have thought about this so much about, why has this happened? And absolutely, I think the introduction of terms like Kung Flu and China virus helped to kind of like set the spark. But the racism was there. It has always been there. It's not like that suddenly created this like anti-Asian sentiment. It has been there and it's just been below the surface. And so we've had anti-Asian attacks probably, since the beginning of time, but it's just become this fireball now. And because people now feel like they're allowed, like they've somehow been given permission because now they're blaming Asians and Asian Americans for the virus, they somehow feel this permission to act on it. And obviously in the world, there's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of anger. Everyone's been cooped up basically for the past year. So I think everything has kind of come to a head now where all of this anger and frustration is coming out, and it's coming out, unfortunately, to our Asian elders. And, I'm glad that you mentioned about taking action, because I think a lot of us have learned, so much from the Black Lives Matter movement, that it is about action. Like, it's great that people post about things on social media, and that's a wonderful first step, because when it came to the anti-Asian attacks, there was very little mainstream news coverage of it after a certain point, right? Like after, Trump was talking about the Kung Flu and China virus and stuff, it gotten some attention at that point. But I think the news cycle moved on. And so people weren't necessarily covering our stories. So as that first movement, it was important for us to share on social media, to get that news attention on the major news networks and newspapers and stuff, and to have people talk about it more. But then it became, okay, but what are we really going to do about it? And so there was frustration, I think, from some of the community organizers that there were a lot of celebrities and influencers and other people who were kind of taking the attention and then not necessarily knowing what to do with it. Because it wasn't like, okay, donate to this place. And some of the places that were being suggested to donate to are some of the more larger national organizations. So now I think that people really are shining a spotlight on some more of the grassroots community organizations, because those are the ones those people are on the ground, and they truly are the ones who are trying to fix the situation. So Gold House had put together this great resource with Cape USA. They vetted a whole bunch of community organizations, and those are the ones really that we should be donating to, we should be volunteering with, and truly helping the people who are on the ground.
Yeah, I love that resource, and I'm actually pulling from it to create my own resource guide internally at my place of work. So
that's awesome.
I want to share that with your episode if you'll allow me.
Absolutely, yeah.
What's one thing that you can recommend to someone who's listening right now that they can do tomorrow to get one step closer to their dreams if Michelle, you are their vision of what they want to be in the future?
I think what I've been pretty good at, again, and like I sort of segment my career in two parts. The first 10 years, I was just trying to figure shit out. I didn't know what I was doing. The second half of my career, somehow the world opened up to me and I felt enlightened. And I felt like I can do big things. And so if I could help people, I guess, skip to that second part, it is reading a lot. It's meeting a lot of people. It's understanding that the only barriers that are on you are sometimes caused by you, right? And I think about that all the time, that I feel like I handcuffed myself in the first part of my career by not understanding how big I could be, right? And so because I didn't dream big, I wasn't thinking huge picture, I was kind of handcuffing myself to this smaller reality. Once I had that thought of, I could be a CEO one day, right? Then I was like, wait a second, I can really dream big now.
So I want to ask you a fun question, because I know we've been a little more serious throughout this whole conversation. What is your holy grail beauty product or treatment?
Oh my gosh. I always say this is like asking, who's my favorite child? Okay, so I'll give you an expensive one and then a non-expensive one, because I think sometimes people get frustrated if it's only the expensive one. So I love dewy skin. And so there's a foundation that Clé de Peau makes. And I always say, like, it is so expensive, but it is so worth it. It's called The Foundation. And it is like a dream product for me. Like, I put that on and I just look so glowy and so amazing. If there was a splurge that I'm going to splurge on, it is that. Like, it is fantastic. And then I'm actually staring at something here. I am big on hand cream. So, Allure has our Best of Beauty Awards. This one has actually won 2 Best of Beauty Awards because it's great. It's Skin Fix Eczema Plus Hand Repair Cream. Sounds totally not sexy, but like hand cream, especially now during like COVID times, we all wash our hands so much that to just have this like handy hand cream sitting on my desk, like right next to me, is super amazing. I'm also, I will say, a big fan of sunscreen. I think most Asians know to wear sunscreen all the time, but some don't. We, in our podcast, The Science of Beauty, our first episode was all about sunscreen because it is that important. Talking to dermatologists about it, it's like most people don't wear sunscreen every day, and they certainly don't reapply throughout the day. And so it's so important that, like, I can't remember the exact figure, but it's like 95%, let's say, of the negative things that happen to our skin over time, it's all sun damage related. So once you sort of like learn about all of that, it's like I now not only wear sunscreen every single day, but I reapply throughout the day. It's very, very important.
So I really shouldn't be telling you that I was going to tanning booths up until a couple years ago, huh?
No.
My mom still cringes, by the way. Now I cringe too. But yes, sunscreen, all for it. So Michelle, I'd love to know what's next for you personally, as well as for Allure. I know it's 30th birthday this year. Your hope for it is to change the world. What's next?
Yeah, so many exciting things. Well, on a personal level, you and I were talking right before we started recording, but I've got a baby. So I've got 2 older kids and also a baby. So on a personal level, super busy with the kids, and it's been great. On the Allure level, we have our Science of Beauty podcast. We're actually launching 2 other podcasts later this year as well. We're looking at the business of beauty and also the culture of beauty. So that's really exciting. And then we also, once the world opens up, we're opening our first ever Allure store.
Ooh, I'll be there.
Yes, we have this awesome location in Soho. It's right on Lafayette Street in Broome. Huge. It's like 3 floors, including a basement, but it's going to be so, so exciting. I think one of the great things about working at Allure is not just, as I mentioned, changing the world, but we've had kind of like this freedom to expand in a lot of different ways. So whether it's the store or podcasts or being on TikTok or being on Clubhouse now, all the different platforms are really exciting, but also to be a business person. Like I truly, maybe it's me saying I wanted to be a CEO one day, but like I feel like I've gotten to be a business person, and being able to launch the store and being able to run the Allure Beauty Box, doing those things on top of the publishing part of it has been really exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm a subscriber to the box.
Oh, yeah.
I have the magazine. I am here to support 100%, and I'll be the first one in line to get into that store. So
I love it. I love to hear it.
Yes, amazing. And thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for tuning in to the Hear Us Roar podcast. If you connected with Michelle's journey, please comment and be sure to hit that subscribe button. Also, pop over to www.hurpodcast.com so that you can stay up to date on all the latest episodes. It's a great way for us to keep in touch so that I can continue to encourage you to see your passions blossom. I'm your host, Sarah Porritt, and until next time.